All right. Five. Okay. Okay. All right. Welcome back. I see people now frantically running up the stairs to get their goodie bags, as they say. My kids always say goodie bags. I don't know why. All right, we'll finish on time or maybe even early. You'll get to go to the party. Don't worry. It's okay. You'll get what you need to get. Did anyone go to the thing this morning? Of course not. We got this people saying you should cancel class so students go to these things. I'm like, no, they're not going to. I actually said we should post an attendance requirement. If you actually want to cancel class, sign into the thing. Are you wearing the school colors? Oh, very, 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 very patriotic, or whatever the word is. Okay. We are just about done. I, I always say semesters go quickly, and maybe you feel the same, but this one just sort of flew by, very quickly. Saturday, so 2 days from today, I will be going over the midterm from the fall of 2020. If you haven't already, please take the time to actually do it. Give yourself 90 minutes. Even if you do it tomorrow night, it's fine. If you come to this session not having done the exam, you'll be at a deficit. It will not be very useful for you. Okay, so today we're doing 2 cases. On Saturday, we're doing the review. Okay. On Tuesday is our final actual substantive class. You'll notice I assigned 1 case. It's only 15 pages or so. So I'm deliberately giving you a light reading load so you can sort of get started on your preparation for the end of the semester. On the 20th, we have class, but not really, right? My goal for the 20th is for you to actually take a final. Let me just hold on. I'll just tell you which one it is in case you want to. Let me just check my notes. It's going to be fall. I don't want to do that one. People didn't like that one. Was about the Houston Astros. People were very upset at me that year. Let's see. Maybe. Yeah. Yeah. No, that was the Astros. People were not happy. I'll give a different one. Okay, this one's good. So go ahead and do. Okay, so you know what? I'll call it. So for the 20th, I want you to do the hold on 1 second. You know what? There's a problem because the link doesn't match up with the exam date. It's December of 2018. So go do fall of 2018. Let's do a frozen question. Let's do let's no, let's do this one. So December 2018, part 2. Let's do that one. This one was fun. It was a Batman question. Yeah. So again, let me just make a note for my own records. It's going to be the fall of 2018. The second question, part 2. So I don't think I'll be here. You don't have to be here either. If you want to just do it from home, that's fine. I'm not going to take attendance if you don't want to come here, but I'm at least giving you that slot of time to take in your own time. Okay. So at some point this week, I'm sorry, at some point next week, I want you to do the fall 2018 part 2 final exam. Cool? Okay. We will be in class though on the final day, which is the 25th. That's the final actual day of class. At some point before the 25th, make sure you take that old final and I'll go over it in class. Again, bring your questions. I am doing this deliberately. I'm giving you a midterm to sort of warm you up, and then like 1 week later, hit you with a final. So I want to review 2 full exams. You'll find that I have, model answers, model A+ answers, things for you to look at. Those will be helpful for you. Okay. So again, yes, sir. Oh yeah, sure. I'm happy to explain that one. So when I make a model answer, it's not actually any one particular student. What I do is I look through the entirety of exams and say, who answered question number 1 the best? Boom, copy and paste, right? Who answered question number 2 the best? Copy and paste. So it's kind of like a hybrid where I pick the best. Because sometimes, maybe the A+ answer does really well in one thing and, just okay in another one. So I try to pick the best answer for the model. Also, I try and pick an answer that is sort of easy to understand. And let me say what I mean. I love you all. Not all of you write well, right? Sometimes people write a really good answer that's sort of very complicated and it's sort of like dense. I pick a student who writes well so you can understand what they're trying to get at. So it's a good answer. I will caveat this for Randall's question. The word limit's 1,000, which I enforce very strictly. The model answer will go over 1,000 words because it's from different people. So people say, oh, that's not fair. Deal with it, right? The model answer is the best of the best, what I found that year. The memo, I actually write the memo when I write the exam. And that's my way of saying, here's what I'm looking for. It's sort of like a rubric, not strictly, but it's sort of like a rubric. It's a way of telling you, here are the range of things I'm thinking about. So there might be a question, let's say 5 or 6 possible answers. And really, my questions have a lot of answers. You don't have to get all of them. You might get a couple and still get a full credit. Okay. So do the exam first on your own, then go over the memo, then look at the model answer, or in other way. But I usually look at the memo first. That's what I'd recommend. Yes, sir, Ivan.
So there's no benefit to doing or getting all those answers.
You can't with the word limit, right? And I was gonna talk about this for a minute. Let me sort of segue into the actual writing. Let me just pull up the 2021, the 2018 one I just mentioned a moment ago. This is fall 2018, December of 2018. So again, the instructions will look more or less the same as the midterm. It's all the same. You'll have 90 minutes for the midterm. You'll have 3 hours for the final exam. Okay. The 1,000 word limit is enforced very strictly. Okay. So for the midterm, you'll have 1 question, 1,000 words total. That's it. Okay. If you exceed 1,000 words, I stop reading and I do a word count. What does that mean? If there are 5 questions in the midterm and you have 1,000 word limit, 200 words per question. I know where you were. You have caught red-handed. If you again have 1,000 words for the midterm and 5 questions, that's roughly 200 words per question. So to Ivan's question a moment ago, you don't have space to do everything, right? I know a lot of you are very smart, and what you like to do in an exam is just vomit. You dump everything you know, hoping, praying you get points. Right? This is what I call the spaghetti in the wall approach. You just throw a pot of spaghetti in the wall, hoping something sticks. You can't do that with me. It will not work. So you have to actually be somewhat thoughtful of what answer you want to give as the best answer. Right? You can't just regurgitate your notes. This is why I keep telling you, notes not going to help you. If you're just copying from an outline, dude, you're going to have time. You will not have time to finish. It won't work. Okay. So again, midterm 1,000 word total. For the final, you have 2 questions, part 1 and part 2. Each part is 1,000 words. So 1,000 words for part 1, 1,000 words for part 2. If you write, 1,500 words on part 1, that's still over the word limit. It's 1,000 words and 1,000 words. Please don't blow the word limit. The word count in ExamSoft is a little bit tricky. These instructions may be outdated because the software's been modified, but there's a little button that shows you a number. And by default, the number it shows you is actually the character count. That's how many letters you've typed. Do not, please, for the love of God, do not write 1,000 characters. 1,000 characters, like 4 or 5 tweets, right? A couple text messages. That's very short. You have to actually click on the little document icon, and that pops up the word count. Garbage. Okay, spam. Right? You have to click on the little document icon, and that gives you the word count. If you don't know how to do it, go do a practice exam. The registrar will set you up with that. Practice it beforehand. Okay. If you are handwriting, which the number of people handwrite is very small, it almost never happens anymore. You have to do a manual word count. You know, get around it. I'm sorry. You do handwrite exams? Good, don't. No, I mean, look, you have to take the bar exam soon. I don't know anyone who handwrites the bar exam. Maybe this person exists. I don't know who this person is. Right? It's not a good strategy. So you should at least get in the mood. When I started teaching 10 years ago, it was a much stronger number of people handwrote exams, and I hated it because they were at a disadvantage because you can't type, you can't delete, you can't move stuff around, and so on. Okay. All right. Always the exam. See, there's part 1 with instructions, and here's part 2, which is also some instructions. Right. Read the instructions carefully. I know that sounds sort of stupid and obvious, but I will give you information. So, for example, I say here, the Gotham District Court applies American common law rules. Oh, isn't that useful? Right? That's a good piece of information to know. So now you're not applying modern rules, right? Don't skip this paragraph. I tell you there's a race notice statute. Well, that's useful to know, right? There's a recording question. I tell you you're bound by the U.S. Constitution. That's telling you we have a takings case. We have a takings case, right? That's what we're getting at. Okay. I then have questions, right? And they more or less follow a similar pattern, right? Well, I'll give you a few sentences. I'll say something happened, and I'll say, how should the court resolve this dispute? Right? That's an open-ended question, which I know you all hate, because I'm not trying to help you, right? I want you to sort of figure out what the issue is. So this is a question involving a covenant, and you have to see whether the covenant's enforceable. Right? The next one, there was a scam, there's a title search issue with a warranty deed, and so on. How should the court resolve the dispute? Okay, so question 1, roughly 200 words. Question 2, roughly 200 words, and so on. Okay, this is a question about deficiency judgment with a foreclosure sale. This is about a zoning regulation with a electric fence around it. Okay. Timing. The hardest part of my exam is actually timing, and I say this with some trepidation. I know many people have extra time in the exam. It's almost like 40% of you. It's just the number is just skyrocketing. No, it's not funny. It's a tricky situation where roughly half the class has half the time, or at least 3/4 of the time. I've actually asked if I can have an exam with no time limit, which I would love, which you actually can't do because there's actually people with time and a half and whatever. So infinity times 1.5 is still infinity, so you can't do it. I would do a take-home exam. I'm not allowed to do that either. Anyway, assuming you have 3 hours, time will be of the essence. You probably spend maybe 20 minutes reading the question twice straight through. If you sort of race through the question and start answering right away, you'll miss stuff. Because sometimes there might be something in question 2 that helps you with question 1. And if you start writing question 1 immediately, you might miss that. You won't see it until it's too late. After you finished reading all of the questions, my friends, at that point, you need to start actually writing. And I've made this point before. I'll repeat it again. Stop calling me. Stop. I made this point before. I'll repeat it again. Given the fact that you have only 200 words and it's an open book exam, you do not have the time to Iraq. You do not have the space to Iraq. You don't have the space to Kriak or whatever the other thing. I never remember all of them, right? The rack, right? I want the A, the analysis, the hardest part, the one you hate the most, right? With a closed book exam, memorizing rule statements is very useful, right? With an open book exam, what am I doing? You can copy rule statement from your notebook. So it's the A, right? How should the court resolve this challenge? How should the court resolve this dispute? I want you to give me an answer. What would a court do? And you need to bring in authority. I don't care what, I mean, well, I care what you think. You're a lovely people. I want what the courts think, right? Um, right. What case? X versus Y, right? This jurisdiction has a case. The common law rules X. Under the race notice statute, the first record, and you have to have good faith, right? I need you to appeal to authority at every juncture. Um, Grading these questions is somewhat easy because I can spot very quickly who doesn't follow the rules, and that you're not bringing in authority, right? If there's a case on a taking and something involves this was installing an electric fence, you should talk about Loretto. Yeah, you should, and say this case is similar to Loretto, or this case is different. If it's a case involving a foreclosure sale, talk about the mortgage case we had with I can't remember the name, but the case from the Northeast where there was the only one person showed up for the sale, right? Talk about the cases and name them. All right. In fact, one of the few good things your notes are good for is case names. A lot of kids, I shouldn't call you kids, I'm sorry. A lot of students come to my exam and they have a list of the cases with a one sentence summary of each case. So he's like, oh, what was that case with the mortgage foreclosure sale? That's good for your notes, right? You can just check what's the name of the case. That's very useful to have, right? So again, when you're writing these answers, you'll see this in the model answer. Use authority, bring in cases. Show me that you've been learning the law and not just whatever a commercial outline might teach you. Part 5 is always what I call a policy question. I know this is sort of small to see. I'm sorry. Let me make this a little bit bigger. Okay, so the setup here is, land regulations implicate questions of race, status, property, and so on. State governments make decisions based on some of these factors. Discuss what role courts should play under the federal and state constitutions in scrutinizing land use regulations. This is sort of open-ended. It's a policy question. What can you talk about here? Mount Laurel, maybe. Talk about Kilo, maybe, right? There are probably 5 or 6 cases we've talked about with race, socioeconomic status, and land use. Bring them in. And it's really open-ended. You have to sort of get creative. I'll just show you part 1. The policy question was, how should courts balance the benefits and burdens of deciding cases under the takings clause? Bring in Lucas, right? Bring in Tahoe Sierra. Bring in, we're doing today the Raisin case, Horne, right? Show me that you can actually make a policy argument based on some authority. Right, so don't get thrown off. Oh, it's a policy question. Let me just say, oh, I think it's fair, lovely. That's not your answer. Okay. I know this all sounds like a lot, and frankly, it is. But this is why I want you to take the practice midterm this week. Get yourself sort of. It's like putting your foot in the pool. The midterm's easier, right? It's less content for sure, but I write it at a level that's easier. The final though will blow your mind, and I want to make sure you actually take it clean with no distractions, so you see what's like. The number one thing people say is, Josh, I didn't finish. I'm like, okay, I got it. I understand, right? I understand you didn't finish. You have to then work on reading the question more efficiently, not getting stuck. And in my experience, generally the reason why people don't finish is they don't know the answer, right? They're just spinning their wheels. They just don't know how to answer the question. And I can't help you with that too much because someone says, oh, Josh, can you just recap the semester for me? And the answer is, no, I can't do that. It took me 28 classes to get to the end. But if your problem is, I know the material and I'm just stuck writing an answer, okay, that I can help you with, right? That we can work on. Going through a lot of the older exams, seeing how the model answers are written, that gives you a guide. On the syllabus, I'll show you, I've posted more exams than probably any other professor in the country. I think I'm at that level with the A+. So there's more than enough for you to work with. And just start the more recent stuff. To be completely candid, my earlier exams were not very good. Exam writing is not easy. You think taking exams hard? Writing exams are really hard because I have to anticipate all the things that will come up, like all the crazy questions that you'll have. I can't answer it on the spot, so I have to address them in advance. And invariably, I make mistakes because I just did. Oh, I didn't space this, but they're better now. All right, I think I said what I want to say. Yes, Patty.
So are you going to allow us to have a printout of these?
Only paper. Whatever you want to bring on paper is allowed.
No, I'm saying, will the prompt, like these 5 pages, will they be printed out for us to be able to use?
During the exam?
And I'll explain why. On Exemplify.
Yeah, no, I know. It sucks. It's scrolling. I know. Can I get back to you? I don't remember. If I have an option of making on paper, I will, but the school is sort of weird about that.
Actually, so somebody asked in tax and they said they allow it, but the
Okay.
professor has to approve it.
All right, then I will ask for paper.
Because
No, this came up.
tiny.
No. I'm with you, and this one broke my heart. This was during the COVID semester. One student. So there's a part one and part two, and one student didn't click onto part two. She answered only half the exam. It was a pass fail. I passed her. It maybe it was an act of sympathy, but she was the only one who did it in a class of 80. Everyone else clicked, but she, for whatever reason, didn't click next. You have to click next to part two. And the exam instruction said there are two parts, so she was on notice, but I passed her. That semester was a disaster. It was a pass. The COVID semester was just dreadful. With for exams. But Patty, I will make sure I'll ask for paper if I can. I will, because I'm sympathetic because the scrolling does not work well. It's very little letters, and you have to sort of like do side by side. It's not pleasant. So let me can I make an inquiry about this, and let me just make a note for myself. I'll just um, make a note to check with my secretary. Uh, no, my perspective is give them paper. If they don't want to use it, they don't use it, right? But the rub, though, and this is actually non-trivial, is actually the manpower of printing out whether it's 70 of you, 65 times what 10, 8 or 9 pages. I mean, that's a lot of work, and unfortunately, a lot of the efforts to digitize are to reduce the manpower. I mean, there's an issue of proctors. I don't know if you guys have been tuned into this. There was an effort about 2 years ago to eliminate human proctors and go all the the camera thing, right? And I sort of flipped out at that because I didn't like it. Um, and the reason why we did this was actually not necessarily because it was better pedagogically, but we don't have enough bodies to proctor. They basically have to request volunteers for the secretaries and staff to just sit in the room. And in candor, a lot of them aren't actually looking at people. They're not. They're just sort of doing. There have been proctors that have fallen asleep. Look, don't laugh. So I mean, the human being is in some regards better and worse than the camera, right? The camera is omnipresent. And we've actually had situations where cameras have picked up cheating. It's also false positives because someone was like, sort of looking around and doing all these things and they're not really cheating. So there's not a good solution, but I will inquire about the paper. What other questions you have? Yes.
So you could take in absolutely anything,
On paper.
but yeah,
No digital, no tablet, nothing, no camera, no phone, no laptops. I mean, you have your laptop, but it's under the lockdown. Don't cheat, please. Just don't. We actually had a guy we caught cheating last year. I don't know what he did, but he actually confessed. Or it might be a girl. I don't know. It's a student who actually was caught cheating, and the student ultimately confessed. And they don't tell us how they cheated. Sort of, I want to know because I want to see how to avoid it. But we do catch people. It's not common though. This is the first time in several years we've actually had any sort of uh, academic integrity issues. During the COVID bar, what they did was they actually booked out the Hilton Americas hotel down the street, and they got a hotel room for each student, and each student took the exam in their own hotel room by themselves. That's what they did the bar, and like they seriously had a proctor walking up and down the hallways, looking in the rooms to make sure you weren't like doing anything. You had to put your suitcase in the closet, and they duct taped it shut. And I'm not kidding you, they actually duct taped the bathroom door shut so you wouldn't go to the bathroom during the exam. You had to like put a little like a cone on your door if you wanted to use the restroom or something. It was like this insane protocol during the COVID to let people take the bar exam, whatever. Yeah. No, I mean they figured it out. Other states, some states just canceled the bar together and said, "All right, you're admitted." They just admitted people straight up. Well, we'll see how those lawyers do in a couple of years. No, I'm serious. Like there are studies, and they're disputed, but there are studies that show a very close linkage between bar failure and academic and discipline. Actually, bar discipline. That people who fail the bar several times sometimes aren't the best lawyers, and they are cited for malpractice. The bar's under attack. People don't like the bar exam. Actually, we got our numbers today pretty good. We're up almost. I think I heard 78% today for our bar pass from February, which is very good. We're in the 60s last year, so actually good numbers. February bar is always much lower than the July bar. All right, what else about the exam or midterm? Yes, Julianne.
So I was thinking about,
Yes.
I know we have 1,000 words for
Part one.
what, will it have a question space or an answer space for each sub question? or is it
I
one
wish
block?
the answer is no. It's all just one block.
Okay,
Yeah. So part one has 5 questions, and all 5 questions be in the same block. The answer space.
so as far as like making it clear that like this is for.
If you click
A,
next, it will enter your answer for part 2 into the next screen. It formats separately in the PDF when I get it.
Okay. So I'm trying to figure out like if it's all one.
It's not. It's
block
one
over
space and then another space, or 2 separate spaces you have to type into.
Parts 1 and part 2.
Correct.
And then for the sub questions within part 1.
There is no separate space for the sub questions within
Okay,
part
so
1.
as far as like notating question like part.
Look, what I recommend is you write part 1.
Okay.
Below that, question 1,
Okay.
question 2. So that's way I'll know what it is. Some students, they drive me crazy. They don't have any sort of separation. They just have a block of text, no blank lines. They just have a block of text, which is just, it drives me nuts. Like, I can't see where 1 begins, 1 ends. Please just put the number 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, so I can at least visually see it. Like, you think you're saving words by omitting the numbers? That just, it makes me insane because I can't. It's just a block of text. I can't see where 1 begins, 1 ends.
So we should take that into account for our wording.
It's 5 words. It's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. No, that's 5. 5 words is okay. No, it's a word. It's a word.
Letter A is a word.
Yes, it's okay. Those are words that are useful. Again, but please don't do this. People start deleting words between spaces. Like, I've had people, an entire sentence has no spaces, and it's obnoxious because you're trying to cheat the rules. No, you're trying to cheat the rules. There are rules for everyone. It's for the fairness. The reason why I have the word count is to put you on the same playing field. The student who can write 1,000,000 words in an hour, and the student who can write 1,000 words are not treated disabled. I wanted to put everyone in the same playing field, right? Every brief you file in court have a word limit or a page limit. Every brief you ever file in any court. It's to make it fair. And some students, the entire sentence is just one long word. And like, it's obvious they ran out of time. They started deleting, and it's awful. Also, abbreviations. I mean, this is more of a property 1 thing, like FSSLC. If you avoid, be careful with the abbreviations. If I can't figure it out, then you're in trouble. Yeah.
So long as we put the bar for a minute.
If you want to do that, you can. But I usually can figure them out. But sometimes I don't know what the abbreviation is. It's like a 7-letter acronym. I don't know what the hell the acronym is. And I'm like, okay.
No, we're safe. It's really don't.
If I've used it in class, you might be okay. Right? Dibby is fine. I've used that one in class. All right. What else? We good? All right. Let's do today's stuff then, please, if we can. You'll be ready if you trust the process, as they say. If you follow the plan, you'll be ready. All right. So I want to begin, and I'm just going to copy. I'm not going to type the entire thing all over again because I don't want it's way too long. But I want to begin with the sort of overview we did in the last. And again, I copy this, I think, verbatim from the notes. Might be a little bit different, but I want to just walk through this one at a time. Right. What makes the topic here today so tricky is that it's a common law. Right. You have all these cases decided over the course of many decades that don't actually match up. So you have to sort of understand how the doctrines evolved over time. And let's just walk through our cases. How to check was the Brickyard case. Harmful, noxious uses can be prohibited. No compensation required. Penn coal mining case. The regulation went too far, or balancing test. Again, Penn Central, the tower above the train station. This again was also a balancing test, focusing in large part on your investment-backed expectations. Then we get to Lucas. Then we get to Loretto. This was the cable installation case. It was the permanent physical occupation, no balancing, bright line rule. By the way, if you want to figure out where to put Horne in your notes, Horne and Loretto match up. We'll talk about that later, but just sort of preview of what we're going to cover today. That's the Raisin case. Lucas, was the case from South Carolina on the coast. They had a permanent moratorium on construction. That was a 100% diminution in value, apparently permanently, as we learned later. And that required compensation. It was a bright line rule, no balancing. But then we get to Tahoe Sierra, which I think we can all agree sort of, if not modified, reimagined the Lucas standard that said the permanent deprivation must be permanent. All right, everyone get that. Then we get to our flow chart, which just now just is this ghastly monstrosity. I'm sorry. It started off so neat and clean. Now it just looks very ugly. But we're in the context of regulatory takings. We have to ask ourselves, what exactly is the government doing? Are they occupying your place permanently? That's the easy one. That's Loretto. No balancing. But if there's something short of a permanent physical occupation, a lot of things to think about. The government can still prohibit harmful, noxious uses under the Habicheck standard, but those nuisances must be common law nuisances. They can't be newly decreed or newly invented noxious uses. Lucas now only applies in a very narrow context where there is a permanent, that's the key word, permanent deprivation of all economic value. And again, no common law noxious uses. But otherwise, we go back to Penn Central land and you lose. I hate to say that, but you lose because under the Penn Central test, it's very hard to actually prevail, except in some circumstances like flooding and otherwise. All right, everyone get this. If you didn't get this, just watch our video from last class, but I think we've beaten this flowchart to death. All right. Okay, so we have two cases today. Again, the Horne case really belongs in the Loretto category. If I had to put it somewhere, that's where I would put it. And if you read Chief Justice Roberts' decision, he cites Loretto quite often. That's actually where I would put the Horne case. Now, someone always asks, Josh, what about Koontz? Right? What about Nolan? What about Dolan? And the short answer is it doesn't really fit anywhere here. You might make it number 3. It's a separate issue. But usually an exaction question, which we'll get to in a moment, the facts are different that you won't want to fit it somewhere here, right? Okay. But at least the raising case thing is probably closest to Loretto. That's where I would place it. In fact, in the prior edition of the casebook, I think Loretto and Horne were taught back to back. I would teach them both in the same day, which makes sense. So this is my fault. I actually recommended that the authors go chronological because that's how I prefer to teach, and they actually listen to me. I don't know why. So before the cases were modular, you had Penn Cole and Penn Central together, you had Loretto and you had Horne together, and they skipped Lucas and Tahoe Sierra. They just skipped them all together. But I said, you gotta go sequential, and then they listened to me. So sorry. All right. Who's up next? Caitlin, who got me a nice goodie bag. That was very kind of you. Do you want to please give me the facts in our first case, Koontz?
Sure. So Koontz is the landowner and purchased this undeveloped tract of land. It was like almost a season. And it was basically wetlands.
Hmm.
Same year that he purchased that land, Florida enacted the Water Resources Act.
Okay. Mm-hmm.
St. John's River being one of those.
Good.
And under that act, it required landowners to obtain a permit from the management of storage of surface water if they wanted to construct on their land.
Brother, what is a wetland?
A wetland is like a marsh, swamp.
If that is correct, but wetland is defined quite broadly. Basically, any land that's wet. I'm being slightly facetious, but if water can run onto a land for any period of time, it might be a wetland. There's a case before the Supreme Court this year called what's it called, the Sackett, about what is actually a wetland. And basically, if water might collect in a pool some parts of the year, it's probably wetland. So the phrase wetland is basically anything. All right, go on, Caitlin, please.
And the management they have authority to impose reasonable conditions, for the permit that were necessary
Good.
to ensure that the construction would be harmful to the water resources. And then later, like 12 years later, so the state passed the Henderson Act, which made it illegal for anyone to dredge or fill in or on or over surface waters without the wetlands resource management permit. And then the saying that for the permit, applicants were required to provide reasonable assurance that proposed construction on wetlands wasn't contrary to public interest.
Good. Okay, let me pause here. That's very good. Thank you. All right, so we have Florida has this regime that says, as a general matter, if you want to build on or near a wetland, you must come to the government with a proposal, right? You can't just apply for a permit and stamp some, check some boxes, right? You have to say, okay, you want to build here. What are you going to do to mitigate your construction, right? What are you going to do to make things better? In other words, we're not going to just give you a permit to build because you want to. You have to have something to address your construction. So, for example, let's say you're building on part of your property and you're going to put cement and asphalt. That creates the risk of runoff, that the water will run off into the wetland and destroy it. So the government might say, fine, you can build on this portion of your land, but you must create what's called a conservation easement on the other part of your land, right? What's a conservation easement? You basically give an easement to the government such that the land cannot be developed. You're saying basically, I am reserving this land for green space, no development. You can never build on this land in perpetuity, and the government can enforce that. And whoever purchases that land from you in the future takes the subject to that easement. It's an easement in gross, if you will, for the benefit of the public. Conservation easement. Everyone with me? Oh, we're missing a K. Kayla. So can the government do that? Can the government require you to give an easement on your land for the public benefit as a condition of granting a permit? Can they do that?
The court here held that basically that's what they did.
Well, no. Here it wasn't actually involving an easement for land. They wanted to do something else. I'm asking you a question. Can the government require you to give an easement to the government as a condition of a building permit? Can they do that? Well, what case governs that? Or cases? Grayson?
Isn't it the Nolan Bowen case?
Yeah, what's going on there?
So in the Nolan case, that one was who got the nexus test.
Mhm.
And
Well, just what's the general issue? What is the government demanding from you before you get this permit?
some sort of compensation back.
Well,
right?
don't say compensation. They're not asking for money generally. In old days, what were they asking for?
Easement to use.
Land. Yeah, they want a property interest, right? To use the lingo, they want a stick from your bundle, right? They want you to grant them an easement. So this is sort of a weird deal, right? This is not like Kilo, where the government says, we want to condemn your property to own it, right? It's not like Penn Central. They say, well, you want to build here, you can't build it, period, right? You can't build. They're saying something different. They're saying, okay, you want to build? Pay us. Give us something. And this is not just an application fee. They're asking for an actual property interest on your land. All right. So there were two cases decided in the late 80s and early 1990s. Nolan versus California Coastal Commission and Dolan versus City of Tigard, place in Oregon. Right, and there's a little sort of summary of the case beforehand, which I'm assuming none of you actually read. You're not supposed to laugh at that. But anyway, you should read it, right? In fact, I think they used to actually have Nolan and Dolan in the book. I regret they removed them, but I know why they did. But you should read those summaries. But I'll give you the facts briefly. Nolan involved beachfront property. And the property owner wanted to renovate a beach bungalow, which is basically a cabin on the beach. And the government said, okay, we will give you a permit to build your cabin if you grant an easement to the public that they can cross your beachfront property. And he sued, saying that that approval process was itself unconstitutional. Right? What happened in Dolan? You had a guy who owned a store, and he wanted to pave his parking lot. What's that song? You pave paradise, put a parking lot. He wanted to pave his parking lot, right? And the government said, fine, you can pave your parking lot if you dedicate a greenway, a conservation easement to the government, such that your other land and adjacent property can't be built. Now, the government was thinking, okay, you know what? If you want to modify your beachfront property or your store, you got to do something good for the environment, right? You have to let the people cross. You have to create a greenway. And in both cases, the Supreme Court said, no, you can't do that. And the reasoning became clear over time. But the short answer is the government can't extort you, right? You know what the phrase extortion means, right? The only entity that can grant a permit is the government, right? You can't go ask someone else for a permit. And the government says, okay, you want this? Pay us. Give us some valuable land. And if you say, no, I will not, the answer is, okay, you don't get your permit. And you can't go anywhere else. The court found that this was straight up extortion. Right? Because imagine a different case where the government said, okay, we want to just take your land and put a public sidewalk there, or take your land, make it into a park. Everyone agrees you'd have to pay compensation for that. That's eminent domain. And the court said you can't do it indirectly through the permitting process. But then the court created this test. And I'm not even going to write in the book because the test is gibberish, right? But I'll tell you what the test is, right? The government can't create what's called an unconstitutional condition. In other words, they can't condition your exercise of a constitutional right on surrendering that right. If you have the right to have property, the government can't force you to give that up. And I'll give you an easy example of the unconstitutional conditions doctrine. This has actually happened. Let's say you live in public housing, and the government says, okay, if you want to live in public housing, that's fine, but you will consent to random drug testing. No probable cause, no warrant, no Fourth Amendment. Anytime you want, we can come in and give you a drug test. And we can search your apartment too. And you say, wait a minute, you're living in public housing. If you don't want to, if you don't want a Fourth Amendment, go live somewhere else. Right? So the courts have held that that's a no-no, right? The mere fact that you're maybe accepting some government benefit does not require you to surrender your constitutional rights. Right? The mere fact that you're living in public housing, does that mean you have to consent to a random drug search or search of your home, your apartment, whatever it happens to be? Right? So it's a similar issue here. A person seeks some sort of benefit from the government, a benefit, to build a construction permit or something, and the government says, fine, we will give you this benefit if you surrender your constitutional right. And what's the constitutional right? Giving up your right to takings. Giving your right to a compensation for taking a property. Everyone see that issue, right? The government can't condition some benefit on you surrendering your right to just compensation. All right, everyone get the test. Right, so this is called an unconstitutional condition. It's also called an exaction, E-X-A-C-T-I-O-N, exaction, the case you use in some of the cases. An exaction is, again, where they put a condition on permitting. Now, some conditions are okay, right? So, think of the case here, right? Mr. Koontz said, fine, I want to build, so I'll build on this part of the land and I'll dedicate the rest to the government. That would be okay, right? Because you have one plot of land and you want to build, you want to make sure some land is conserved for green space to avoid runoff by the wetland. The government can probably make that demand. But what happened in Nolan and Dolan went too far. Building a house doesn't require giving the public access to your property, right? There's not a close connection, right? Why does a government need to take an easement if all you want to do is renovate your bungalow? And the government had some rationales. Well, we want people to have a view of the water. If there's a house there, they won't be able to view the water, and they'll think it's not their access. But the court said that's nonsense. So there's not a close enough connection or nexus, right? That's the magic word. Like, what's LexisNexis, right? Nexus means a connection. You ever thought that, right? What's a nexus? A nexus is a connection. Lexis law, nexus connection to the law. Whoa, I just blew your minds, didn't I? Westlaw. Well, West was a company in Minnesota. It's much more boring, right? Bloomberg's a rich guy in New York, right? But there has to be a connection, some nexus between what are you asking for? I want to renovate my house. And what's the government demanding? Easement for the public. There must be a close connection. If you want to think of it in terms of scrutiny, there must be a meaningful fit, maybe intermediate, call whatever you want. There has to be some sort of fit between what the person's asking for and what the government's demanding. And in Nolan, they said the fit's not close enough. Right? There's not a close enough fit between access to the beach and renovating the bungalow. In Dolan, they said there's not close enough fit between paving a parking lot and creating a greenway at some adjacent creek. Because that'd be a close fit. There must be a nexus and rough proportionality. These words are just nonsense, but they mean connection. Right? If you study Bernie v. City of Flores, remember congruence and proportionality? Remember that? Nonsense words means connection. Right? It's how do you just dress up the word connection? Justice Scalia, by the way, funny, he wrote Nolan, but he said he hated the word nexus. I saw him give a speech where he said, I hate the word nexus. Doesn't mean it means connection. Don't use nexus, use connection. He was very grumbly at that point. Anyways, but nexus. Use your hand up.
Yeah, could you give the definition for exaction again?
An exaction is when the government conditions some benefit on surrendering land or surrendering some property interest to the government. There's not a good definition; it's sort of fuzzy, but that's a decent one. Although I don't like the Koontz case. Alito is usually a very careful writer. This was not his best opinion, and the reason why is Kennedy. I mean, if you notice, Justice Kagan's extension keeps citing Justice Kennedy, and by the way, Kennedy didn't join her. Kennedy was in the other majority. So I think when Alito was writing his opinion, you had to sort of keep Tony on board. It's just never easy to keep him on board. So it's very not clear opinion. I don't like it, but what do I know? Okay. All right. So that's Nolan and Dolan, right? But then we get to Florida, and what Florida did is different, right? What Florida said is, we're not asking for an easement. We're not asking you for a conservation greenway. Instead, Florida asked, or maybe did they suggest? Kagan doesn't like them. Well, let's say they asked, right? Just make it easy for now. Florida asked for something else. Florida asked Mr. Koontz to pay money to repair some wetlands somewhere else. Right? Again, he didn't own this land. It wasn't connected to his land. But they said, there's other repairs that we need to get done. We could do it with taxpayer dollars, or you could do it. So go hire some contractors and make these repairs. Now, I'm sort of being hesitant because Kagan said there was never actually a demand. She said there was never actually a request. That Florida just suggested this is one way to get the permit. Alito's like, when the government suggests something, they're not really asking you, right? It's like when a professor says, would you mind doing this? I'm not really asking you, right? Could you please give me the facts of the case? I'm not really asking you, right? It's more of a it's a demand. It's an offer you can't refuse, as they say. But anyway, I'll get to the facts of it later. But anyway, let's assume that Florida indeed asked for it. The Florida Supreme Court said a request for money is not covered by Nolan and Dolan. Let's just start with that one, right? The government, if the government asks you for money, there's no exaction. All right. Now, Justice Kagan and the dissenters argue that that was correct. And it's sort of almost like a policy argument because very often the government asks you to pay for lots of things. You have to pay taxes, you have to pay fees, and so on. And Kagan says if we start treating every demand for money as an exaction, the courts will just be bogged down in federal takings cases. Justice Alito says that's nonsense, right? How can it be that demanding an easement that say is worth $1,000 is a taking, but demanding $1,000 straight up is not a taking? And he says there's no functional difference. There's no functional difference between an easement demand and a money demand. That from the perspective of Mr. Koontz, they are the same. But there's a tricky issue that arises. When the government demands an easement, they've actually taken property, right? There's actually a taking of property, which triggers just compensation. But when the government demands money, has there been a taking? And if there hasn't been a taking, is there a requirement to pay just compensation? And if there's no requirement to pay just compensation, what's the measure of damages? You're not getting just compensation. You still have your land. You have all the bundles in your stick. So this is a weird case because it's not entirely clear what the outcome is, right? The government says, we will give you a permit if you do X. And he never did X. He never gave him he never spent the money. So there's no taking, right? There's no property actually taken. And if there's no taking, there's no just compensation. So what exactly is he seeking? So the answer is maybe under state law, there's some provision to grant monetary damages. And the majority says, well, we'll let Florida courts figure this out. Like Florida man can do it, right? It's not for us, right? Someone else can do this. But the sort of weird part is the state courts never really addressed it. They sort of just said, okay, Supreme Court ruled, we're done. And money had been awarded to Koontz in the past and he got to keep it. But that was awarded under a takings theory, but there was no taking here. So this is sort of an unsatisfying case. Let me say this point again, it's important, right? With an exaction, when the easement was granted to the government, land was taken, so there's compensation must be paid. But here, no land was taken. At most, money would have to be paid. And when money's being paid, there's no taking of properties. There's no just compensation. So the only measure of damages would be under state law, and it's not clear if state law provides any monetary damages. All right, everyone see that? So again, I've been teaching this case now for some years, and it's still never clear to me exactly what the remedy was. And this is why I'm saying when you have to keep Anthony Kennedy on board, you have a lousy opinion because the court doesn't actually address the bottom issue, which is what is the measure of damages when you have a monetary exaction, right? When there's a monetary exaction, what is the measure of damages? It cannot be just compensation because there's no actual taking. So what's the damages? Anyone have thoughts? I don't know. The Florida court, I actually went back and read the Florida court decision. It doesn't really address it. There's a note at your case, I'm sure you all read, pointing this out that the Florida lower court kind of just ignored the Supreme Court, which happens. It's like, all right, we're done with this case, right? Again, this case went on for 2 decades. This guy he applied for a permit in 1994. The Supreme Court ruled in this like in 2013. Duke, is your hand up, sir?
Did that note say that he had sold?
I think he had sold it, yeah, so the successor in interest.
So when they gave him, damn, he get that or?
I think the original owner had it. I think Koontz had it because he was the. So what happened is the Florida courts originally ruled on a temporary takings theory, which is sort of weird. But they didn't get full compensation; they got temporary compensation. So I think that was given to Koontz at the time. It was not even Koontz; it was his father to his son. It was kind of also weird the facts there. If you notice, all these property cases are very weird facts, and they take 20 years, and they never get clean resolutions. Look at the Lucas case, right? Tahoe Sierra, Koontz. My goodness, the Raisin case went on for almost a decade. All these, and the Saka case I mentioned before with wetlands, is almost 15 years. These cases take forever, and they've never clean resolutions. I don't know. Missiles for mouses, I don't know. All right, everyone get the holding then of the Koontz case, right? That monetary exactions are unconstitutional conditions, regardless of how the government structures it, right? The government cannot say, oh, you know what, if you give us this money you pay to these contractors who are probably friends of the politicians, wink, wink, nod, nod. Oh yeah. Oh, you know when they recommend you who they're hiring for the job. That's part of the racket. Right. Look at the mayoral race going right now. We know how everything's going, right? This thing with Pappas, you see this with the with a Hobby Airport? That this is crazy. There's a lawsuit was filed yesterday. So Pappas owns, Papacitos, Papados, they have all the restaurants, and they've had restaurants in Papi for decades. And there was recently a bidding of which company would provide restaurants in the airport, and it was a Spanish firm. I think it was a European firm, somewhere in some European company, won over Pappas. And they just came out yesterday that there was a allegation, which I'm saying is allegation. There's something called a quiet period. So when there's a public bidding contest, there's not supposed to be communication between the government and people bidding, right? They're not supposed to talk to each other, keep it quiet. So apparently, someone from Mayor Turner's office called the CEO of Pappas during the bidding process. Hey, I have some information for you. Give me a call. And he said, I want to talk to you about the other bids. So there's allegations of, they never called back, but that they're trying to get a bribe. That's the allegation. Yeah, and the guy, Duke's know where I'm going. The guy had been charged with bribery before. So basically, he was trying to make a phone call to the CEO of the Pappas restaurant company saying, hey, I got some information about the other bids. You want to talk to me? Give me a call. And you know exactly what the conversation will look like. So when they say, go spend money on our contractors, you know exactly who's going to get the money. So it's a racket. Anyway, Alexa, I'm sorry. Bring us back to normalcy. No, I'm going off tangent. I'm sorry. No, I probably can't. No, go ahead. I don't remember it. Monetary exactions are unconstitutional, right? Monetary exactions violate Nolan and Dolan. That's the short answer. I'm sorry. You were waiting to, and you're like, just I don't really remember what I was saying. I think, is that what I said? Did I get that right? Or did I get it wrong? People take notes. Good. Unconstitutional. Yeah, the monetary exactions impose an unconstitutional condition. I'll say it like that. Yeah, but this is a good case. I mean, it's an easy case, but it's unsatisfying at the end. That's how I approach it. Yeah, just your rule of thumb. Whenever the conservatives got Justice Kennedy, the opinion's going to suck, right? Whenever like Kennedy joined the +5, he was fifth vote. The opinion just never actually resolves things cleanly, because that's the price you pay for fifth vote with Justice Kennedy. When he writes majority, you go big, you go everything, gay marriage, whatever you want, right? When the conservatives got Kennedy, it's just got to be really narrow, really narrow. Heller got all these limitations on guns, you know. But when Kennedy writes majority, oh man, the world was an oyster. Okay. Oh yes, I can't repeat that. I forgot.
If when you say it violates Nolan and Dolan, it's like it violates it like as a two-part test, but not
Right. Well, a monetary exaction is treated the same way as a physical exaction. In other words, when the government demands an easement, that violates Nolan and Dolan. When the government demands money, that likewise violates Nolan and Dolan. Does that answer your question? No, I don't think I don't.
Not violated.
Okay, so the book, and again, the notes which you all read, the book has a few examples of exactions that are constitutional, right? There are some constitutional nuisances. So one of the more recent ones involves fair affordable housing. So let's say someone wants to build an apartment building in New York City or Chicago. This happens all the time. And the government says, fine, we'll let you build if you devote 10% of your units for affordable housing, whether this be rent controlled or rent subsidized. The courts have upheld that. The property owner says, wait a minute, that's an exaction, right? You are making me surrender sticks in my bundle, units in my building. But the courts have said, no. There's a close enough connection between building a house in this neighborhood, ensuring that people of low means can live there. So the courts have upheld mandatory affordable housing under the exaction doctrine. Those are not unconstitutional. Does that answer your question? I think that the short answer is there has to be, I don't use the word connection again, but there has to be some sort of linkage, a close linkage between what the developer wants and what the government's demanding. In Koontz, they're saying spend money on these wetlands miles away. There's not close enough connection between the two items, right? That's, if the government said, give us an easement for land on your property, that would have sufficed, which is actually what Koontz wanted initially. He made that proposal and it didn't work. We good? Okay. What else on Koontz? Yeah, oh, you're right here. Good.
That I was curious about, like, they talk about it gets kind of muddy between like taxes and then these.
That's
like,
Kagan's point. Yeah.
Yeah, just out of curiosity, were cities like worried after this came out, or did they really care?
Always what happens is law professors panic and things sort of just settle down. So I don't know in the decades since Koontz have there been allegations that taxes have been challenged under this doctrine, but I remember after Kuntz's disciples like, oh my God, this is going to destroy land use, the missile for the mouse, right? They always say the same thing. It's things are never as bad as you think they are. Just in general, just take a breath. No matter what the courts say, things stabilize. It always happens. Okay. What else? Okay, let's go on to the Raisin case. I like this case. I don't know, maybe you don't like this case, but I like this case. It's sort of fun. I know the guy who argued it. Really nice guy. He's now a professor at Stanford. That's a good case. Okay. Elise, can I give me the facts in the Raisin case? And I'm sorry, I know I don't have a case summary for this one. I just didn't finish in time. I'm sorry. I will get to it. I finished this one almost at 1 a.m. This week's been very busy. The end of the semester is always very hectic, and all these centennial things we have to go to. So it's my time has been diminished.
Say that you were gonna create a summaries for Nolan and Dolan.
I did not say that.
Okay.
No. No, I meant the Raisin case, the Horne case. I didn't get one in time for the Raisin case.
Okay, but you're saying we're responsible for the information on Nolan and Dolan from the book and in your case.
Yes, ma'am. Yeah, I mean, I don't think I put anything in my case summary that was in the book. I think it's more or less the same information. I tried to just give a few sentences because I was actually kind of annoyed that Alito didn't talk about Nolan and Dolan. He sort of just mentioned them. He didn't even give the facts of those cases. It would have been actually really helpful if he had done so for my law students, but he was very inconsiderate in that regard, I suppose. I'll go yell at him. Actually, I saw him a few months ago. And I said, "Oh, I'm teaching your one of his cases in one of my other classes." So he was amused. All right, please facts, please, in the Raisin case.
Yes, so in and so there was a certain one for raisins.
Raisins, yeah.
And,
By the way, everyone know I know this is stupid. A raisin, a dried grape, right? I don't presume you know anything, right? Because how do you make a raisin? You dry out grapes. All right, Elise, go on, please. LexisNexis grapes, blowing your minds. Good.
the particular race or in this case that I'm not giving out the notes. It's facing.
All right, so I know I dunk on John Roberts a lot, but this is my favorite opinions by the chief. When he actually believes what he's writing, he's an excellent judge, right? When he doesn't, when he's in his own little balancing zone, it's awful, right? It's painful, right? It's like a hostage in his own body. But when he believes what he's doing, it's good. In this opinion, he believes it. So I want to just play the first. This one's called the opinion hand down, where he announces the opinion. I just want to play this because his description of the facts is just delightful. Okay. Oh, the build up. When I'm plugged in here, I have to readjust my sound output. Here we go. Okay. Okay. I'll get down. Okay. Where is it? Okay. Where is it? No, this is where I want to jump to. Here we go. I love it. Okay. So just I play that part again. So in the Chief Justice's mind, this is this kind of this like nefarious, right? This like evil government henchmen. Think like like in like Batman or something, right? Who show up in the dark of night in Fresno with these trucks to pick up, tons and tons of raisins, right? Now just we have to, just to be just to be principled. This wasn't a surprise, right? The U.S. Department of Agriculture have had this policy for decades. So the Horns knew what they were getting themselves into, right? They participated in this market. They understood that they would have to surrender certain raisins based on these policies. And one of the curious parts is who actually wrote the rules was the farmers, right? The way this basically works is the farmers basically get together and they discuss how much excess they'll have, and the government more or less ratifies that. This might remind you of a case from con law. What case from con law? What's it called? Wickard. So Willard. Yeah. Wickard. Yeah, Wickard. Wickard v. Filburn. So that was a case also where the government said we want to restrict the amount of wheat that's grown. Now, what you may not know is how are the wheat quotas set? They were actually set by the farmers. The farmers would ratify, the government would ratify what the government did. So there's actually a lot of instances in which the government restricts how much agriculture you can grow. Now, in Wickard, if you remember, they said you could not sell in interstate commerce wheat above a certain level. And a good friend, Roscoe Filburn, did. Here, the government did something different. They didn't bar them from selling it. They said, we will confiscate it. We will take it from you. And what will the government do with it? Different things. They might sell it in the international marketplace. They might just destroy it, dispose of it, and so on. Now you say, wait a minute. Why is the government taking food from American farmers and sending it overseas? Or why are they destroying crops? The answer is supply and demand, or at least something close to it. Right? The idea is if there are too many raisins on the market, the price will go too high. And if there are too many raisins in the market, the price will go too low, and farmers will not have a good return on their investment. The farmers will go out of business. We won't have enough farmers, and it'll just be a disaster. Does this actually work? I will let economists speak to it. I have no idea, but the farmers generally like it. Why? Because the government might actually pay them money for raisins they might not be able to sell. Right? In certain years, not every year, but in certain years, excess raisins could actually generate revenue from these other markets, in which case the farmers will get paid. Mr. Horne, though, thought this was communism, and he said that straight up. He thought these were communist people taking his raisins. They said, for my cold, dead, raisin-stained hands. And so he refused to allow them onto his property, refused to allow them to seize his raisins. Okay? So what happens? He goes to court, and he says, they've taken my property. Now, in a literal sense, yeah, they took it, right? Everyone agrees they literally would take his raisins on their truck, right? Everyone agrees on that point. But was this a taking for purposes of the federal Constitution? The lower court had a weird holding. The lower court said, well, sure enough, they took his raisins, but he retains a property interest in them. That is, if there's any revenue to be had, he bases a future interest in revenue. So because you keep some of the sticks in your bundle, there's no actual taking. The Ninth Circuit also said that personal property, that is a chattel like a raisin, is not subject to the takings clause at all. And this isn't a crazy holding. There's some language in Scalia's opinion, Lucas, which suggests that taking a personal property is different. So they had some grounding. But this case goes to the Supreme Court once, it goes to the Supreme Court twice. The first part of the holding is actually very straightforward. Roberts says, taking personal property, chattel, is a taking. And that's not particularly controversial, right? It shouldn't be shocking that when the government takes your land versus taking your car, there's still compensation to be paid. The harder part of the case was actually the second half. Was the government's scheme, or I should say plan, to provide some sort of revenue sharing itself form of compensation, right? And here the court splits pretty sharply, right? The chief says that when you have them taking your property, it doesn't matter if they might pay you for it later. There's still a taking, right? The fact that you might have some residual revenue later does not negate the taking. There's still a taking of property. All right. But, and here comes the big but, when you have a taking, you must provide what? Just compensation. And what's the measure of the just compensation? The majority says what the government assessed it. So in other words, the money, the value the government assessed the raisins at, that was itself the measure of just compensation, right? What was the court doing here? They were keeping this case away from the Ninth Circuit. They were saying, okay, this is going long enough. Ninth Circuit, don't mess us up anymore. We're just going to say straight up, the just compensation that's due was the amount that they assessed. The government said the raisins were worth X. That's it. You're bound by it. Justice Breyer said, "Why are we doing this? Should we let the lower court do this on its own?" And the court basically said, "No, Ninth Circuit, you messed us up enough. Let the horns go, right? Let the raisins go free." Okay. That's it. It's actually there's not that much in the case. I think it's actually a pretty easy case. I shouldn't teach. I don't know, but I think it's a fun case. All right, questions in the majority or the dissent. I'll get to the Sotomayor dissent in 1 minute. But questions on the Breyer dissent or the Roberts majority. All right, Justice Sotomayor had a dissent that no one else joined. It was a solo dissent. And her argument is that under Loretto, there was no actual taking. And just to sort of summarize, she said in order for there to be a taking under Loretto, the government must basically take every single bundle in the stick, right? Every bundle in the stick must be taken. And because the government kept some sticks in the bundle, the right to future revenue, the Horne still had some property interest. Now, the problem with this argument is I think it actually misreads Loretto, right? And so here's I'll just paste it up here. Here's the passage from Loretto, and I'll put in big letters so you can all see it, right? It says property rights in a physical thing have been described as the right to possess, use, and dispose of it. To the extent the government permanently occupies, remember the permanent occupation standard, physical property effectively destroys each of these rights. And so Justice Marshall, in opinion, had the word effectively in there, which I think is significant. Well, the court was saying is that when you take away these various sticks, right, there's going to be a taking. But Justice Sotomayor didn't focus on the word effectively. In fact, that word appears nowhere in her opinion. And she says there's only a taking when every single stick in the bundle is diminished. And that's not what Loretto says. So it was sort of a weird opinion. Remember, I was at the airport, I was reading this and going somewhere. I was in Terminal E Lounge, like, what? Why? Where did this come from? And I wrote a very long blog post about it at the time. But the Sotomayor dissent didn't really catch on. But at least it's a different perspective on the taking issue. Okay. Questions in the raising case? Yes, Jacob.
So this is under Loretto.
I think so. In fact, the chief doesn't say so clearly, but I think it's basically a Loretto case, right? By literally taking the raisins, they're permanently occupying them, if you want to think of it that way. But it's not clear because with Loretto, the real property stays with you. But in this case, the government seizes the raisins. So it's not a perfect fit. I think Loretto's the closest case we have. Question the raisin case. Yes, Alex.
So the court usually refers to taking as like much more damaging, I guess, to property rights than like a regulatory taking.
Well, I mean, in a way, this is a regulatory taking. It's not eminent domain.
That's kind of my question because like it feels like a complete application. I guess not.
Well, look, you could, whether you use Lucas, right, or use Loretto, the end is the same. It's a categorical regulatory taking. So it doesn't really matter which road you use to get there. The reason why I told Jacob that I think this is more of a Loretto case is that Robert seems to invoke Loretto over and over again. It doesn't really invoke Lucas. And it's a permanent taking for damn sure. They're not getting those raisins back. They're gone. Right? The government's going to sell them or do whatever, destroy them, whatever else. My favorite line in the Robert opinion is about the wine. Everyone knows the famous Marie Antoinette quote, "Let them eat cake," right? So this is yeah. When Roberts is in his zone, no one beats him. Just he's in his own world, right? But when he's in his zone, just he's no one can touch him. All right. Questions. So I'll let you go to the part a little bit early today. You're welcome. I'll put the exit polling on. You can type in the elevator. I'll see you all Saturday. Saturday morning. Otherwise, have a good day. Yeah. No, 10:30. 3:16. Yes, sir. One second. Let me turn the thing off. Thank you. Okay. Good.